All right, for Module 4, all we're going to be doing here is a mini research project and presentation. It is a group project, so make sure that right off the bat you take a look at both the instructions, which we'll walk through here briefly, and then the project teams. So in your project teams, you'll be listed what your category is, which we'll go through in a second. Make sure to use the participants function in EduCAD if you don't already know who your teammates are. Look through the participants. At the very top of EduCAD, you should be able to see that way up at the beginning under participants here. Say, going back into the research project and presentation, here are your instructions. They look something like this. Let's make them a little bigger for you here. So really the purpose of doing this is right off the bat, a lot of students nowadays with the current state of our infrastructure in the United States, not just heavy civil stuff, but all power generation, a lot of students are graduating and going into that sector because there's been such a high demand. So we didn't really have anywhere else in the curriculum. So we thought probably the best place, MEP, just to kind of get the basic idea of how the different systems work, from more traditional fossil fuels to nuclear to wind and hydro and the motive type of energy and the solar. So what we're going to be doing here is a small group research project that sort of gears on those 4 different categories of energy generation. And what we're really trying to do is try to prove that whatever your category is the very best, whether you believe it or not. And the reason I do it that way is over the last several years of teaching it this way, or teaching this content and doing the research, if you are trying to prove yours is the best, what ends up happening is you end up getting to a little bit more depth into all of them because you have to compare and contrast. So right off the bat here, I will tell you, I mean, there's a lot of political bias when it comes to this. There's a lot of it takes a while to research and try to find good information because what you normally find is, say, for instance, like solar. If you're looking at solar stuff, what you're going to find is what people who are proponents of solar energy, and you're only going to find good information about it. Same thing if you look for fossil fuels, same thing if you look for nuclear. So it is very difficult because it has become so politicized and because the internet can control so much that it's hard to find good fact. I will say, I mean, I have a lot of background in this this sector, a lot of research put into it. So I do have my own biases as well, but I will say that it is good to look into all of them. I think there's a lot of good use in different categories, in different situations. But what I'm trying to get to through all of this is understanding that we're trying to figure out that there's different perspectives, there's different uses, different stages of different types of the categories with where we are with our current abilities and technology. But what you're trying to do with your group is prove that yours is the best. I'll let you guys read through all this stuff. Like I mentioned before, there are 4 categories. So one group will be presenting on fossil fuels. I would highly recommend sticking mostly with natural gas just for the sake of time because that has become the most predominantly used. But it is good to mention coal and petroleum too because there are specific uses for those that are still heavily utilized and in different categories. Nuclear, obviously we're talking mostly uranium, but there are new methods as well that would be probably good for that group to look into. Solar, there's 2 types, but what we're generally dealing with is PV or photovoltaic. There's solar thermal too, but that is generally just used for heating. You can create electricity for it, but again, for the sake of the assignment, just focus on the photovoltaic. And then just because of numbers, motive types of energy are hydroelectric and wind. They're the same general concept. Obviously, one is using wind as the fluid and one is using water as the fluid, but so you don't have to get into too much of the weeds of comparing those two as far as how they produce energy because their turbine produces the energy, the mechanical energy, or turns the mechanical energy into electrical energy. So focus more on the uses, the geography, all that kind of stuff. Looking through similar requirements here, there's going to be 2 steps. Number 1 is you're going to have to, before you create a presentation, you have to do some sort of research. So you're going to have to turn in whatever that research document is. So you're going to submit a project research document as a PDF. It's basically just an outline of all the categories and all the things down here. So here is a list of the categories, all the things that you should probably be covering. description of whatever that proposed content might be, right? Examples of things that you might be able to look at. So like statistical comparison. So if you have wind energy and hydro, for instance, you probably want to figure out how many plants I have in each of those types in the United States. You may want to look into different locations as well. Or locations on the map, may want to look into how it's used around the globe even, right? Different parts of the world. How much electricity does each of them produce, right? Comparing those versus other ones. And then also trying to prove that yours is better somehow, right? Trying to skew the facts, or maybe not skew them, but use them to your advantage as much as possible. Understanding some of these different concepts, right? So heat rate and thermodynamic efficiency, like so for solar, you don't really have that, right? But it's good to understand what those things mean because it's a comparison. You're not comparing apples to apples when you're looking at solar versus nuclear. They do two totally different things, right? Solar does totally different than any other ones anyways. But the different ways nuclear works is different than the rest of them as well. So geography plays a big role in all of them. So understanding that's a big deal. Advantages and disadvantages of each is a big deal, right? Because some have tremendous advantages in some locations, right? And how that ties into geography. This is the tough part, the total process, because what we talk about with energy generation is the end result. So when that thing is up and running, how is that energy produced? And how efficient is it? And how clean is it? And everything. But we tend to forget about purposefully is the entire process, right? So every single one of these things has mining involved. Every single one of them has transportation. They all have manufacturing. They all have fabrication. They all have, whoops, they all have more transportation. They all have the building process. They all have operation and maintenance. They all have waste disposal, right? So that is an entire step. What we generally talk about is operation only when it comes to these on a big scale. What I want you guys to do is try to dive into a little bit more of all of this, right? So you have to get materials from somewhere. Where do we get them? How do we get them, right? There's environmental processes with all that kind of stuff. There's pollution concerns, right? Same thing with waste, same thing with everything else that's going in. So this is the tough one to find, most of the information. But ultimately what you're trying to look for is which one uses the least amount of mining for the most output, the least amount of transportation for the most output, the least amount of manufacturing for the greatest output, right? And so on and so forth, right? Because ultimately what we're trying to find is how do we get the most energy out of something, putting the least amount of energy in throughout the entire process. I don't expect you to be able to figure that out in the next couple weeks, but I want you to try to find where all this stuff is, because that will help hopefully open up perspective to where we are currently. How do we really keep moving forward, right? Public concerns, they each have different things to deal with, right? So this is your basic outline. This is the minimum that's required. So take a look through all these things, work with your group to figure out how do we do this, and then create a backup document that shows nicely outlined, with headings and section headings and stuff like that, and subheadings that shows this is how we came up to our conclusion, and then you put that into a presentation. So you're going to submit one PDF document with your research backup and one PowerPoint presentation to the portal on EduCat. So those two documents are going to be submitted into this portal right here. Okay, and after you're done with that, what you're going to have to do is go into the presentation VoiceThread external tool right here and create your presentation. So the big thing to note with that one is there's a couple resources as well on EduCat, right? So you have VoiceThread presentation help, and I put a CTL help with EduCat items. If you have any questions, they're the best resource for understanding how to use VoiceThread and doing it and setting it up properly. So you should be able to just click on here. I'm not going to do it because what I see on my end is different than what you guys all see on your end. So it's not going to help anyone. But just make note that someone has to be selected as the group leader, we'll call them. They have to be the one who starts the presentation on their end, right? And then make sure to title that whatever your group's category is. So if you're doing fossil fuels, make sure that whoever the group leader is goes in to the student gallery and types in, to start their presentation, types in fossil fuels. That group leader should also upload their slides first, okay? And then after all group members uploaded their slides, right, after the leader did it, the group leader will have to go back and make sure to review and properly rearrange, because they don't always go into the right, they don't always fall right in place the way that you intend them to. So make sure that they're in the right order before you, fully complete and submit your presentation through that. Okay, in order to view the presentations, you must select the Student Gallery button in VoiceThread on the home page. A couple of things, your team will have 10 to 12 minutes to present on your topic. So as you're submitting and uploading, right, you're technically all going to be doing your own quick video with your PowerPoints and then uploading those. So you want to make sure that combined you have between 10 to 12 minutes done. Will be graded basically on a couple different things here. I have three general categories for the presentation. One is content, right? Make sure that you include your most pertinent information on based on your backup documents that you have. That will help you win your case, right? And then clarity and organization. Make sure that the information is clearly stated, it flows well, makes sense to an audience of non-experts, okay? And the PowerPoint easy to follow and visually pleasing. So a couple things you run into all the time. People will put just paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs on your slides. You'll lose audience immediately, right? Focus on bulleting, simplifying, not putting too much on a slide, having nice visuals, nice graphics, things to look at that help the audience stay engaged and follow along. And then professionalism, basically, I always throw this into my projects or assignments. Always take a look at whatever you do and say, would I present this to my boss? Would I turn this into my boss? How would I do that, right? Also, time with the timeline. Did we hit the 10 to 12 minutes, right? Do we think it was your effort that was put in was necessary to help your team succeed in winning, quote unquote, your argument? So just because we only have a few weeks in the semester in the summer here, it's encouraged. I want everyone to try to review at least everyone else's PowerPoints. I want to see, it's interesting to see what people come up with for these. It's also interesting to see, how much people learn out of it too. So it's heavily encouraged for you to review other groups' presentations and provide feedback. You should be able to do that on VoiceThread, whether it's written or you can submit like a little voice recording or a video recording too, if you want as well. So it's not graded, so you don't have to do it, but it is good to do it. I'll try to adjust things in the future to see if we can do it a little bit more streamlined to make sure that everyone can at least review everyone's. But for the sake of time, obviously we don't have that much, and this isn't the primary content of the course, so I want you to focus on the necessary pieces of it, but I do want you to review others as well. As far as the grading rubric goes, the presentation will be 30 points. So the content, the clarity and organization, and the professionalism, each are 10 points. And then the research document, the backup documentation, outlining all this stuff, and is worth 20 points as well. So yeah, you're going to be uploading your research document backup, right? The PDF and your PowerPoint to the assignment, just so I can have those for grading. But you actually have to submit your presentation. So you're going to be recording and submitting your presentation through this external tool right here. And that is pretty much it. If you have any questions, please let me know.